Welcome to the Digital Rights Podcast. I am Rob Anderson, the digital rights guy and founder of Grape ID. And in this podcast today, we will act as a combined podcast interview of our guest, Dean Sapp. And we will also be accepting any questions from people in the audience about the company that I started, Grape ID, our WeFunder campaign that is up and coming. So with that, I would like to introduce Dean Sapp, and I will go ahead and bring him up on the screen. And Dean Sapp, he is he has been a CISO of two multi-billion-dollar financial institutions. He's currently a CISO. He has been a technical lead and part owner of Braintrace, which sold in 2021, and he's currently on 4 advisory boards for cybersecurity companies. He's published numerous security papers, and he's spoken at 75 plus conferences. And just knowing Dean myself, he's a genuine guy that really cares about family and cybersecurity and helping and making the world a better place. And not to mention, he's pretty awesome because I know that very often he's helping to fight data breaches and fix the aftermath in large corporations. So with that, welcome, Dean.
Thank you. Really appreciate the time this morning, Rob, to meet with you and talk a little bit about privacy and Grape ID.
Yeah, let's just jump right into it because I know that, as I've mentioned, I founded the Grape ID in 2018, and just before we talk about that specifically, I would love to hear from you since you're an investor in Grape ID. Would you care to share with anyone watching this why you invested in Grape ID?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Privacy is a very growing and expanding area of cybersecurity where it's so important to protect people's privacy. Identity theft is very, very common, and as you know, many of us have been involved in data breaches and have been exposed with our private information. I just got another letter yesterday from a financial institution where my data has been exposed and they're trying to do an investigation, and ultimately this impacts people and it impacts their livelihood, impacts their ability to get credit or their ability to make large financial purchases, because it can take literally years to clean up all of the messes from identity theft. So Grape ID, over the last several years, I've probably evaluated 30 different cybersecurity or privacy startups, looking for places where we could do the most good with the resources we have. And when Rob approached me and we started learning about his vision of putting the power of privacy in the hands of the individual instead of the Googles or the Microsofts or the different marketing companies around the world that literally have made hundreds of billions of dollars by using individuals' private data, with often without their knowledge or consent. I mean, I feel like everyone has an understanding that when they use Google and they put in ad searches, and then over the next, 3 days, they get advertisements for that particular thing they were looking for. I think we understand that that kind of goes on, but I don't know that very many people have given implicit consent and opted in to that kind of tracking and other behavior. So being able to put the power back in the hands of individual people to decide what they want to be marketed, what they want to have sold about them, and how people use their information is really important to me. And so it really resonated with Rob's business plan and learning more about the company. And so I've just been excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely resonate with that because myself personally, I've been either a victim or I've experienced data breaches and identity theft, particularly just because I have a simple name, Robert Anderson, and it's very easy for people to accidentally or intentionally, swap me out with other online profiles, people named Robert Anderson. So yeah, that there are two different elements there that I'd love to explore. Which let's go with. So you mentioned on the personal side how there's a need for privacy on the personal side, but what about on the business side? Like, should businesses care about privacy, or should they keep like in the case of advertisers, why should they care about being respecting people's digital right to privacy?
Yeah, great question. In my day job, I work as the senior vice president of information security for a large software company, but I also serve as the data protection officer, and so I get requests all the time from our thousands of business customers about what do we do about privacy? What do we do? Are we protecting the data? When I get a request that someone wants to have the right to be forgotten, right? They want to disappear from that particular business. Is there a way to remove all of that sensitive information about them? And so this is something that's part of my daily job, and I would say it's extremely important for businesses because if they do not comply, if they do not know how they're protecting that individual's data, if they don't know all the places where they have sold it to other marketing or advertising companies, then they're culpable. They're responsible for that data. And then when that third party gets breached, it impacts so many other businesses in that supply chain, that whole stream of information that's being bought and sold on a daily basis. So it's very important. And I feel like it, in many cases, violates a lot of individuals' privacy because they're not being told that their data, that Google's selling their data to other companies and monetizing it, or whoever is involved. And I feel like that's inappropriate use of their personal information. If anyone's going to benefit from the sale of their personal information, it should be the person, not the
Amen.
businesses. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you have any insight about what specifically companies do right now in terms of tracking data and when it goes to, when it's sold to someone else? Like, does there even exist a way to track your a set of data that's sold to someone else?
It's difficult. I will say that there are probably 4 or 5 very, very large data brokers in the country, and they will buy data from pretty much anyone, and then they try to make sure it's accurate and whatnot. But there really is no guarantee. I actually had a dear friend that her information was inappropriately sold on the internet, and it took about a year and about 120 letters sent out to data owners, websites, different places requesting that her information be deleted because it was inaccurate, and it was shared in a way that was not favorable for her in any way. It was actually quite negative toward her,
Hmm.
and it was ruining her reputation, even though she didn't do anything to warrant it. And so it literally took quite some time. So there are a lot of businesses that aren't paying attention to the law, or they're sort of just ignoring it until someone actually makes a deliberate request to be deleted or to be updated so it's accurate. In many cases it's just not their priority, and because of that a large number of lawsuits have been filed against many of these businesses for unfair or deceptive business practices.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you haven't said anything about actual data trails or logging, especially like blockchain type style, where when a business, for example, Walmart, let's say Walmart has your credit card information and your face profile and any other your purchases, then if they have your data that around the specific transaction or every time you go in there, then they store that. Then if that data gets sold to, for example, Oracle, who is a big compiler of data aggregator, then there's no way to trace the data from Walmart to Oracle. Is that correct? Or are you aware of any sort of logging system or tracking? Does Oracle keep track of where they get all their data?
Yeah, so great question. So there's a general rule that a friend of mine, uh, Boyd McKinnon, said quite some time ago. He said if a product is free, then you are the product. So, or ultimately your data is the product. So in the case of, Microsoft, or we'll go to your Walmart example. In the case of Walmart, they have terms on their, like, if you're using their free delivery service. Well, it's not technically free, but if you use their service, uh, you have certain rights, and very few people actually read those rights. And in many cases, using a product often means you are giving them consent to use your data however they want. And most browsers, for example, have beacons, trackers, GIFs. They do geolocation. They look at cookies and all kinds of things that most people don't realize that they're actually giving up that right to protect it because they're using the product, and those are the terms of the product. Very few companies do a good job of making it very clear to the consumer. And I think you're seeing a shift in the market fairly recently, where you'll start to go to a new website and you'll see a little banner that says cookies. And some companies do a decent job of saying, opt in to only business necessary cookies, or just opt me into all the cookies. And when that happens, that essentially means you're opting in to all of those trackers and whatnot. But there is not an easy way to take your identity and say, okay, where are all the places that my data is stored? It takes a significant amount of research. And then by the time you've cleaned up, 50% of the companies, your data has been resold to, 15 more. So the short answer is no. It's very difficult for a consumer to know all of those places, and even more so to get control over who has it and to verify that it's even correct.
Okay, so there does not exist a robust way for a consumer, or I would even argue a company, to track where the data they own goes from a company who has that data that is sold to another. There's no way, there's no logging system that tracks it. And then the only recourse they have is to request a copy of it, or to request that it be deleted, or both, or do nothing. Those are literally the only options, right?
That's correct. And you know what you brought up earlier, if personal data was part of a blockchain, then it would be trackable. It'd be immutable. It would be something that you could understand who had it, who sold it, where it went. You'd have that full logging visibility. But no one today is doing that, and businesses don't really seem to care enough to warrant doing that kind of due diligence, because ultimately they're in the business of making money, and they want to make money off of their customers and off of potential customers any way they can.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring in the ad marketplace just a little bit here, because obviously that's one of the problems that we're trying to solve here. Is we, instead of just providing a logging solution, which, what we just discussed obviously would make sense, where if that existed a way to track it, that would be great. But even more important is if we could change the underlying motive behind why advertisers want the data to begin with, then that would be even better. At least that's my thought. Because if motive, for however long into the future we exist with the advertising model, where advertisers are motivated to get as much data as they possibly can to use it to then target people, that's going to put all of us consumers and whoever owns the data at risk. So if we can provide them an easier way where they can accomplish their goal of targeting but without accessing the data, that means they don't even need the data, and they can get much better targeting. And then that's a change in the underlying motive. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or
Definitely. If the consumer had the ability to tell marketing companies really what they're interested in and to essentially establish their preferences, then it actually is a better qualified lead to the business. For example, I like go camping. And so if I wanted to let the marketing agencies, if I had a way to let people know that I'm interested in some good deals on some camping equipment for this summer, then I would be able to choose that. But today, the way it works is I'll occasionally go through, Instagram or Facebook or Google, and I'll look up, what a new tent that I'm interested in, or some new camping equipment, stoves or chairs or something. And then every once in a while, one of those ads will pop up that I might be interested in, but along with it comes a whole host of things I'm not interested in. And they waste my time. And in many cases, they're not even appropriate. There's a lot of ads out there that I just never want to see. And so being able to have the control, giving that control to the consumer, means that the businesses that are trying to sell them camping equipment in this example have a much higher likelihood of reaching that consumer, because it's what they want. It's what they're looking for. They're looking for a good deal on a particular piece of equipment, or a particular, four wheeler, or whatever it might be. So I feel like that is the best of both worlds. The consumer actually gets ads or things that they're interested in purchasing. The business has a qualified buyer that is in the market. And instead of wasting thousands of emails and messages and marketplace ads that are expensive to the businesses, now they're targeting it, and I think that their likelihood of having a successful sale is higher, and the consumer doesn't get bombarded with all this stuff that they really don't want.
Yeah. Uh, so many thoughts. I'm even forgetting them all. So one of the questions here, I'm trying to remember what it was. What? Geez, I had a brain, whatever you call it.
Brain
It
freeze
was such a
happens to
good
me.
one too. Yeah.
Oh, good.
So remind me. Can you just recap what you just said so I can remind myself of the first part? I promise I was listening.
No, it's all good. I was just saying that if we can change the paradigm for advertisements so that individuals get to opt into what their interests are, right? I want to have sports. Tell me when there's some good deals on some jazz tickets or something, or like I
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
camping equipment. I want to have advertisements coming to me that really are what I am interested in.
Okay, great. And I could have just carried on, but I really wanted to remember the specific question that I was thinking. And I remembered it now. So thank you very much. So, in terms of, so you were talking about the efficiency and it just makes more sense. And we haven't even talked about cash incentive where they get paid,
Right.
rather than paying all the middlemen, then the person gets paid. But I'm really curious about the privacy and what your thoughts are in that model where because essentially with Grape ID, the user has their own Grape ID data vault. And then in that vault, instead of having a profile at Oracle with 30,000, or if you include all the different profiles, I've seen numbers as high as 70,000 data points or attributes that each and every person have with all of the different data aggregators. Instead of having those essentially data vaults or profiles, I wouldn't even call it a data vault, but instead of having those profiles out there in existence and we have no idea we have to like beg and request them to even see the data or have it deleted and there's still no guarantee. Instead, we just bring it into the Grape ID data vault where there's full transparency where you can see all of the data that's there. You can see your profile of what does the data or artificial intelligence tell you about yourself. Like, do they think the one that I comes to mind right now is the Target one where someone Target sent an ad to a girl who they anticipated that she was pregnant, but she didn't know and her parents didn't know, and they sent her ads for that because of her purchasing pattern. It indicated she was pregnant, and so they know more about potentially some of us than we may even know. Of course, that doesn't happen all the time, but it proves the point that it happens to a wide variety of extremities, or on a small scale. So, does putting all of your data into one data vault where you can see it and you can control who has access to it, is that more secure or is it not?
No, it's a great question. And my perspective is that having your knowns, the known accounts in one place that you can track them. And as a consumer, you would have the ability to review them and say, oh, this one's not correct. I did a quick recap on my the number of accounts I have online that I am aware of, and it's over 400. And some of them are my first initial, my middle name, my last name. Some of them are my first initial, my last name. Some of them are my middle name and my last name. And anytime if you've ever bought a house or something, they have that sheet at the end where they say, oh, here are all the aliases, all the ways that you have signed your name or gotten credit or opened an account. And, there might be 5 pages of different variations. And I would have had no idea, you know, what those look like had someone not aggregated them. So, similarly, if we have a way to create a data vault which represents you as a person, every version of you as a person that you've had, right? If you've changed your name, if you got married, just having the ability to put all of that together and say, you know what, this represents Dean Sapp. There's 400 accounts that we're aware of. Here's all the permutations on his name that he's used or whatnot, but gives you the ability to make sure that they're all correct. Because I got a call actually yesterday from a marketing agency that had a record of a Dean Sapp that had been at they were like a sponsor at an event. Well, it was an event that I would have never been interested in participating. And it took, a few minutes on the call to find out, number one, what are they calling about? Number two, is this the same Dean Sapp? No, clearly it was not the same, person. And yet they had a database entry with my information and my phone number, and I had no way to correct it other than saying thank you for the call. This is not me. Please remove me from your database. Will they do that? I have no idea. I hope they do. There are laws that state that they should. But that's the example. Having one place, one source of truth that is about my identity and then my ability to edit it, find out who is the data broker, who's selling it, having that control really has never been given to the consumer before.
Yeah, one of the common questions that I've gotten over the past 5 years is, well, putting all of your data in one place, isn't that like a major security risk? And my counter argument is that, well, I've got multiple, but one is just the fact that our data already is essentially in one place, but it's in like honeypots. So all of your all of your usernames and passwords could be in one password manager, or they could all be accessible through your email. Pretty much every single piece of information or online account you access through your one single email account, or maybe you have multiple. And then when it comes to credit and the information that you said, all of our information is already sent to one of three credit agencies, right? Where if you want to see all of the aliases, previous addresses, all of your financial history, you just go to one of those agencies. So yeah, it's in three places, but because it's in three places, it's kind of like having it all in one place as far as the category of your credit information. But then of course there are so many different collections of different types of data in different, like Oracle has a bunch of data, and then our credit agencies have another set of data, and then Facebook and Google, big tech, they've all got their set of data, and we don't have control over it. So back to what you said of the reason you invested is that's what our end goal is. Now, I know we don't have a lot of time left, so what I would like to do is touch base on two things. One is a little more specifically about the mechanics of how we get control, because I know that people in general can be confused about, well, what does it really mean to get control of your data? And then also, I want to tie this back into how how marketers and advertisers can view the privacy of the solution that we're creating in terms of, from a cybersecurity professional like yourself. So let's jump to the first question about the actual mechanics. And we only have time, I think, to discuss the Grape Score authentication, or the Grape ID badge. And I will just recap it for anyone watching that we have a Grape ID badge, which is an identity authentication badge, and it indicates the probability that someone online is who they say they are. And the colored badge system works like this: if it's green, then you know that the person's highly verified. If it's yellow, they're partially, and if it's red, they're unverified. They're not verified at all. So just the logic is that badge will go anywhere that you go on the internet. So on your email, you can see that other people are legitimate or not. And then when you send an email, they can see you're legitimate. When you're on social media profiles, when you are selling your data to or your data insights or giving access to your data, you can see the badge of the company to know they are a legit company, and then they can see the badge of you, knowing that it's a legitimate person, which increases the value. I'm just providing some use cases. So, with that system, what are your thoughts as a cybersecurity professional of how that works, and does it work, and how's it different than what we currently have?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'd say that you're right that like email is the attack vector of many, many bad guys out there because they're able to send an email that looks like your bank or looks like, your medical institution and attempt to trick you into clicking on a link or putting in your credentials to verify, your account. Well, having Grape ID do that for you independently by a set of controls, meaning, you've uploaded your ID and we verify that the ID is correct and it's authentic. And then verifying, normal controls like a username and a password, but then leveraging biometrics on the smartphone to verify your facial recognition, being able to verify information about you that only you would know. Grape ID adds a very high level of confidence that the individual is not a bot, is not a fake, email account, fake person, so forth. So by having this Grape score, that gives a consumer or even a business a very high confidence that this is a real person. This is the person I wanted to communicate with, or I wanted to market to, or wanted to, offer some of our best deals of the season to as a consumer. And it makes the whole transaction a higher probability of success and a lower probability of fraud. Because let's be honest, fraud is prevalent in the online marketplaces that we deal with. I mean, if you ask anybody who owns a business how many, prank calls they get for large orders that never get delivered, restaurants that get, and who, whether they're, they might be a competing restaurant, who knows? Let's hope not.
Yeah.
But there's just so much fraud there, and if you had a way to verify that Twitter message, or I guess X or whatever we're calling it today, is from a real person, if that email is from a real person, if that social media profile on LinkedIn or whatever is the real person, then you know that you're actually communicating with someone that you want to talk to, where there's a legitimate opportunity to improve your business, or to to buy or sell things that you're hoping to acquire.
Yeah. So it's. I'll just restate one takeaway is that you're saying it's extremely important that even smaller scale. So there are different types of electronic transactions that we engage with every day, whether we know it or not. And whether you're logging into a bank account or sending a wire, that's a high risk or high,
Mhm.
like you want to control that. Versus what was one that you mentioned? Just like if you're playing a video game is what I normally say. Like if you're just logging in or signing up for a video game, it's not as big of a deal. Or if you're just going to a website, or oh yeah, or if you're ordering takeout. So obviously, if you're ordering a $10 or $20 takeout versus sending $100,000 wire, it will be easier to scam a takeout and make the business lose money by just calling in a fake order, and then they make it and then no one picks it up or whatever the scam is.
Mhm.
And that's such a small little thing, but it's so small that people don't care as much about it, and it's very difficult to solve. So then that business has that particular type of scam, small scale scam, occur repeatedly, and then over time it ends up adding to be a lot of damages. And then when you add up all of the restaurants, and then all of the other industries that have these small types of
Hmm.
levels of scams, then it ends up being a massive industry. So that's one thing I heard that I thought was very interesting. And as far as the actual technology that's used, I'll just bluntly ask you this: what's the difference between using Grape ID as an authentication versus just Google with two-factor authentication? Like Google's a pretty strong solution; they have billions of dollars, so why would this be any better?
Yeah, great question. Well, I would say that, like you said, Google has a strong security presence, uh, but at the same time, they're still selling your data. So first of all, Grape ID doesn't sell the data, right? It's coming back to helping a business and a consumer have a relationship where both parties are benefiting, right? The ability for a person to get paid, even in small amounts, to accept an SMS text message or to accept an email and reply to that email ad or something in a social media platform. That gives the power and the reward back to the person who's trading their information for something that they want. So Google doesn't do that. Google monetizes all of the data for users that are using their free browser. Remember, if the product is free, you're the product. And
Yep.
then they're leveraging it, and then you really have no say over who else they sell it to. So Grape ID is not, that's not the model. The model is, let's help individuals actually get the marketing information that they want and reward them for it. And then they're doubly rewarded because they can get a small microtransaction for that, for that fee or for looking at the materials, and then they're actually acquiring something that's important to them and hopefully at a discount. So everybody wins in that situation versus it being very one-sided with Google.
Yeah, so you're basically saying the underlying business model is completely opposite, where Google, their business model is designed to profit off of our data and just grab our attention and our data and then make money off of it without transparency and true privacy. Whereas ours is the opposite, where we literally just give you a data vault and then you can make money off of it. You're in control of who can purchase it or what type of data and whatnot. So yeah, that's probably the most important one. And then what about the actual technology in terms of blockchain, artificial intelligence, the specific mechanism of authenticating? And so when you scan your thumbprint on your, let's say, Android device, logging into Google, and then maybe you type in a password, how is that different than Grape ID's authentication system?
Sure. Well, Grape ID has, I think last time I checked, 60 or 70 different ways that can be authenticated. And they may not all be in force at this point, but there's a strong correlation between the number of factors and the strength of that information, right? If Google is, if you're using Google Authenticator and you have a decent password, that's a pretty strong start, but by adding to that other information that verifies who you are, then instead of it just being extremely strong, now it's almost 100% certainty that is the person that we say they are. You've probably heard of SIM card swaps and SIM card attacks in the past. T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, several of these carriers have been impacted. I actually worked on a case where a friend of mine had their one of their wallets emptied because they had a password that wasn't the greatest, and then the hacker convinced the carrier, the phone carrier, to swap their SIM card to another SIM card, and then within a matter of a few minutes, they emptied the entire wallet for the individual because there were only two factors, and two factors when you're dealing with a large amount of money is simply not sufficient. There should be multiple factors. And Grape ID out of the box offers multiple factors of authentication that cannot be forged or faked.
Yeah, so you're saying the increased number of authentication factors, which actually, that reminds me, Google themselves, they were struggling with email account takeovers. So they did a test where they required a physical dongle to be used in order to access their email. And the end of the story is that once they did that test, adding just a physical dongle that had to be used in order to access their email, they found that the amount of email phishing was, I think it was 99.9 or 100% eliminated. They didn't have any email phishing, all because of that additional one. But it was a test. But I know that having a physical dongle, to as a verification mechanism, isn't always, like, you can't count on the whole world doing that.
Right.
So, but it does prove the point that the more, like, even with two or three, then you can drastically increase your security and reduce the number of successful hacks. And yeah, so that's a really good point. And then and then tying back in, I know you mentioned blockchain. So a lot of people there are many different types of solutions like self-sovereign identity, and they use blockchain for people's identity or authentication. And but one thing that's different, I know, with Grape ID is how we use blockchain. So do you mind sharing just a little bit about when someone authenticates, how it uses artificial intelligence, maybe what's that used for, and then how is the signature created by blockchain, or what's the purpose of blockchain to secure, to keep that data wholesome, like to trust the authentication, if you know what I
Sure.
mean.
Yeah, I think so. Let me kind of see if I can put that
We'll say it
together
in
for
better
you.
words.
So blockchain allows you to take a known piece of information, apply an encryption algorithm onto that information that every other node in the blockchain knows about, and then once it applies those two items together, it creates a new value, and that value cannot be altered. It cannot be reversed. It cannot be undone. All you can do is then send that information to another node, reapply that encryption algorithm, and now it's added to the blockchain as another link, essentially. So you can track information like blockchains used for bitcoins and other Ethereum, other crypto mining currencies. And anytime there's a transaction where one's bought or sold, then that information is added to this, what I would call a manifest of all of the events that have ever occurred, and you can track it all the way back. So I had a buddy that had his blockchain, one of his coins was stolen. Well, you can't reverse the blockchain. All you can do is give that person back the equivalent money in cash or something, and then he or she could buy a new coin, right? But the blockchain's immutable, it's irreversible. And so by having information like your personal information added to the blockchain means it can't be altered. It can be updated with new versions and corrected, but it's not something that can be hacked or reversed in a way like that. So by having Grape ID verifying identities, adding them to a blockchain, it just gives an extremely high confidence to any business that's reviewing it, verifying it. This is legit. This is authentic. There's a full logging trail in the blockchain. So using that technology is something that very few businesses have done. Right. Obviously, the crypto mining world has embraced it, and cryptocurrencies and crypto exchanges. But applying that same principle to information is a brilliant way of ensuring its accuracy and authenticity. I can't talk today either. It's Friday.
Yeah, so basically you're saying because of the integrity of the data that blockchain provides, when you apply that to a a grape score, which is the authentication process, and you mentioned 60 to 70. Yes, and in order to process that many, that's, I will just add that that's how we use the artificial intelligence, is to be able to analyze in real time the identity authenticity of people with all of those contributing factors. But then also, as the company scales, then it learns even the smallest nuances of what the probability is of someone being who they are. But then back to your point, when the artificial intelligence determines someone's identity authenticity in the form of their score or a badge, their colored badge, then over time, every time that happens, it's added to the blockchain, and then there's a trail of their identity authenticity. So then you have a really big history of and trackable, but it doesn't actually store people's private information on the blockchain. Of course,
Right.
it stores a signature, so it can be validated, yet it's still anonymous. So
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
yeah. So to wrap this up, I just want to ask you with my last question. And for marketers or advertisers who are looking and exploring the Grape ID Marketplace and see this as, let's say they understand and they see what we're building from a marketing perspective and why it makes advertising so much more efficient, but they're worried, is this really safer or more private? What would be your words of advice to them for them to have any sort of reassurance or what they could do to figure out, to understand it better, just to trust in the technology that we're building?
Sure. Well, I would say number one, any business that does marketing campaigns knows that deliverability is a real problem, and a lot of the emails that they send aren't delivered. A lot of their databases of emails aren't accurate, and in many cases, they've been created through bot networks and things that don't actually represent a person. So at the end of the day, your marketing dollars are not effective if you're not actually reaching real people. Right? And so Grape ID gives you the companies that use the service a very high level of accuracy when it comes to here are individuals, they have been vetted, they have a green check mark or whatever the equivalent is that says this is a real person they've chosen to to be interested in or to show interest in a particular product set. So it gives the marketing advertising executives high confidence that their dollars are not just being wasted, right? There are so
Yeah.
many ad campaigns that I see where I have no interest. And I'm thinking that the marketing leads on those campaigns were hoping it was going to be more successful, but they were peddling things I didn't want to buy, right? So it gives both the consumer and the business a much better chance of having a transaction that's mutually agreeable.
Yeah. Okay. That's perfect. And as far as I know, one other thing to mention is compliance, and I know that's GDPR. I know that these are all acronyms, and an advertiser probably has heard of GDPR and CCPA, the California and the European privacy, basically policies or
Right.
standards. So everything would be made in compliance with all of that, and it already is. So, yeah. So thank you very much. I think that's about the time that we have. So, any other last moments or any last words that you would want to add to the conversation?
Sure. I just say thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm excited about the work that you're doing. I really feel like it's transformational with respect to consumer privacy, and it's really I have a passion for protecting people, protecting my family, protecting myself, and I know of so many individuals, elders that are going through having elder abuse and elder fraud and being scammed out of large amounts of money, and anything that we can do to help build a solution that can help protect people better, I'm all for it.
Thank you. And thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. I hope it's been helpful for everyone to have a little bit more, maybe some technical, some high level insight of why what we're doing helps um, guarantee or at least enforce in as much of a viable way as possible to for people to have their digital rights and including privacy and security and as well as many others. So thank you very much. And with that, we will end the podcast.
Thanks, Rob.